Hey everyone, welcome to Sunrise Extra on, what day is it?
May 18th.
Tuesday.
It's May 18th.
May 18th,
Yep.
Tuesday, that's right. Yeah, so today we're talking about the 41st anniversary of the eruption of Mount St. Helens back in 1982. This is video from
I think that's
that
a
day.
time lapse of still photos.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yes, you're right.
We're so used to saying video, though it looks like
video.
it.
And then, in that same kind of time lapse, you can hear a radio announcer announcing the moment that it blew and all of the aftermath that followed of ash and trees and bridges taken down and people killed and properties destroyed. And so we're asking you, if you lived in the area, even if you didn't, people, up and down the West Coast and far east, if you were around in 1982, you will remember this. So we want to share your memories on the anniversary.
I was 6 years old when it happened. Never mind that. Let's get comments. This comment says
I thought you were reading this. I'm like, wow, how'd you know?
This viewer was just reading my mind. Don't have a name for this viewer who texted us this morning, but this viewer says, I was 6 and an army caravan had to lead us out of my neighborhood. Wow. My dad made us wear face coverings so we would not breathe in all the ash. And there was a lot of that back then, right, Brenda? A lot of people wearing masks, much like we see today.
Yeah, totally. You could not help but. We have another comment. Mount St. Helens, we were here from California visiting family, and I remember we were sitting outside on my uncle's deck drinking hot chocolate, and my mom said, oh my God, Mount St. Helens is exploding. I remember seeing that. I'll never forget that day and all the ash that fell after. I remember going back to school in California and I had to scrape some ash in a jar and take it back with me as a souvenir.
Show and tell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow,
People did
that would be pretty
all over the thing, all over the
incredible.
place.
We have one more here that we'll get to, and then we'll get to some more of your comments live on Facebook and YouTube this morning. But this one comes from a viewer who says, I remember hanging out at the pool with friends and we heard about the eruption, so we decided to drive up there. We ended up getting way too close and watched from a traffic-clogged bridge as the entire eastern horizon was consumed by the smoke plume. Later that evening, we were watching the news and saw footage of the very bridge that we were on. And she says that bridge was actually obliterated later that day in a mud flow.
Wow.
So they were lucky to get out of there when they did.
No kidding.
And, I posted on Facebook, but it was a double deal. I posted the piece that you put together last year, Nina, that I might add is now up for an Emmy Award. It really was a great comprehensive look at news coverage from 41 years ago this day when Mount St. Helens erupted. So I posted that video, and then I asked viewers to share their memories from that day, and I wasn't surprised that there were so many responses, but I couldn't believe the detail. Just like we saw there a moment ago, like people were just giving great detail, where they were, who they were with, what happened here, there, and then next. And do you remember on Sunrise Extra a few weeks ago, I think it was just a short time ago, we talked about, things that happen in our lifetime that we'll never forget, memories that we're all on TV that we'll never forget. And I don't recall if anyone mentioned Mount St. Helens. Maybe they, but now
that's a good one.
It absolutely is, because especially for people in this area, and I've talked to my stepdad about this, and he remembers it living in Philadelphia, but of course it was, world and national news, but he remembers it. But if you lived here at the time, obviously it was even more powerful, it was more impactful, and you could see it with plain sight what happened on that morning.
It was crazy. I remember May 18th, 1981. I was a high school counselor at outdoor school, so we were at Drift Creek on the coast. So it was, I think, a Sunday morning, because we got a big Oregonian newspaper and it had that still picture of the eruption and this huge ash plume just going up into the air. I mean, I do remember Mount St. Helens when it looked a lot like Mount Hood, with that really sharp peak on it. And then I grew up in McMinnville, so, that place was covered with that thin layer of ash. I remember one of my girlfriends and I decided to be scofflaws, and we were going to go play tennis on one of the courts. We couldn't even see the lines on the court because it was just covered with this weird white gritty ash. And you're right about the masks. I mean, it was just a lot. It just, immediately kind of floated into the air as you walked through it, walked by it. So you needed something to kind of protect yourself.
Yeah. I figure, since it is 41 years ago now, I figure that you have to probably be 45 or 46 years old to remember that day. You know, I'm guessing if you were 5, you may have an early memory of that day. But if you're any younger than that, I'm sure that your parents have told you the story. My kids just asked the other day when we were out and you could see, it was a clear day where you could see a lot of the mountains around the area, and we were looking at this beautiful clear shot of Mount St. Helens in the distance, and one of them asked the question I remember asking when I first moved here. Was it taller than Mount Hood, Dad, before it blew its top? And the answer is yes, it was, right? Mount St. Helens did stand taller than Mount Hood.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yep. And I told him that Mount Rainier is the greatest of all here in the Northwest. But yeah, Mount St. Helens once stood taller than Mount Hood.
Yeah. Apparently, apparently a couple times we've said 81 or 82.
I know. I said 82. Brenda said 81. It's 1980. Yes.
Was it 80?
Yeah.
1980 was the year 41 years ago today.
That's hilarious.
I know. When you said 81, I was like, wait a second. I'm like, no, 41 years. It's 80.
It was a long time ago.
Mary Z says we lost our house in the eruption along the Toutle River.
Yeah.
It's still our camping property to this day.
Wow.
But for how many years could they not camp there? I mean, it had to be, I would think, several years before they could go back up.
Yeah, you know, if you know where to look and you drive and you're up in that Toutle and also the Lewis River areas, and you get just a little bit north of Woodland, I think even north of Kelso Longview, there are mounds along I-5, and if you know where to look, that's actually to this day dunes of ash that grass is now growing on from when they basically had to bulldoze feet of ash off of I-5 to reopen the highway.
Right.
There's actually quite a few of them. Next time you're taking that drive, just look. You see these little dunes. Some of them are fairly high. That's what that is. That's dunes of ash.
I have to go up I-5 that way. Tell me again, where? Near Kelso?
There's some north of Kelso Longview, I think, and then there's quite a few. One spot that is, I'm trying to think. I think most of the ones I'm thinking out in my mind, pardon me, are between Kelso Longview and Castle Rock.
Interesting. Okay, I will definitely look for that.
Brian Rock, rail fan on YouTube, says, and I totally remember this. Remember in 2003, or he says 2006, when it started pluming again?
Sure.
When the smoke or,
Yes.
I don't know, ash was coming out. I remember we were flying somewhere, maybe to New York, and we were in the airport, and all the TVs were around the gates and stuff, and CNN was on. And we had just flown out of PDX, and here is Mount St. Helens with this plume coming out. I'm like, oh my God, we're going to miss it.
I think the real, I don't pardon the pun, the peak of that event back in the early 2000s was 2003, like maybe springtime of 2003. And I had moved here in 2000, but I remember was working at Channel 12 at the time doing the out and about segments, so always the fun reports, but things were so crazy in those days, they had me go up there as part of the team to cover during our morning show what was going on at Mount St. Helens. And I remember getting calls from my friends back on the East Coast, like, is it going to happen again? There was a real thought that something big was going to happen again. Things settled down, and it's been relatively quiet ever since.
It was really interesting during that time, though, because we had Sky 8 up and flying, and you could see these, I don't even have the vocabulary. I don't remember what they used to call them, but there were these like magma bulges that were, you could see down into the crater. And, you got a major education as just a general assignment reporter here at KGW about what was happening and why it was happening. And we were talking to all the experts, but yeah, it would have some of those emissions every once in a while, over a certain period of time when it looked like it was kind of coming back to life.
And remember, the experts, I think every single volcanologist or geologist in the area all agree that in fact St. Helens will be the next volcano in the Cascade Range to again erupt.
Mount St. Helens would be?
Yeah, certainly expected to continue to be the most active. Now, whether that's hundreds of years from now or when, we don't know, but they still think that will be the case. And by the way, a quick shout out, because I want to get this in. If you've never taken, and it's a day trip, it's a full Saturday or Sunday on the weekends, but if you've never taken the drive from Castle Rock off I-5 up through the observatories, I think there's still the Coldwater or the initial one, and then the Johnson Ridge Observatory, and I don't know what their schedules will be this summer because of COVID. but it's something you and your family really should invest in doing. It's very educational. They're beautiful observatories. They have all the historic film, some of which comes from the archives here at KGW TV, I believe, and it's really worth your day. And it's important for people to keep visiting those, or we'll lose them one day. We've already lost a couple of them over the years as visitors have gone down in the past decades.
I want to share 2 more viewer comments that are coming in live right now on Facebook. But Rod, I think we took our boys up there when they were 7, and it's probably too young to really appreciate it, obviously, and they don't even remember going up there that day. So I think that we are due back for a visit sometime soon. But anyways, Sherry chiming in this morning. She says, I'm now 58, but I was 16 at the time when Mount St. Helens blew. She says she was living with her older sister and 2 nieces in Vancouver. She says she felt the quake, saw the ash. They left that day and went to California, and the ash, she says, blew all the way down towards the border. And I think I remember hearing stories about the ash falling as far south and east as Utah. Does that sound right, Brenda? Do you recall?
I don't recall specifically, but you know how things get up there in the jet stream or whatever and just make their way all over the place. We have a request. Rob St. Helens says, do you have any old video via the helicopter? So if our producers in the back or directors can find any of that, we should roll some.
If we have that story, I mean, I know it's on your social media page. You could just run it without the sound. But
Push
it's
people
just
to my
all
Facebook
video.
page. Nina, do it. Push people to my Facebook page. It's right there at the top.
I'd like to
I was
see
just
it
telling our
too.
producer if we
Do
can
it
show it,
again.
on here.
Mohammed says, I remember that day when it erupted. We were playing soccer at Dunaway Park and we were covered with ash. I collected some and had it for a very long time. Unforgettable, he says.
I mean, in doing that story and looking through all of our old tapes from, 1980 in the months leading up to it, I mean, we knew something was going to happen. And we were doing stories for months in advance up there because you could feel little tremors on the mountain, and there were big signs to the hikers, climbers, I should say, there, watching for falling rocks and large sheets of snow that were coming down because it was very snowy, near the top. And we had our news crews there, and just seeing, like some old sedan that had like KGW written on the side of, one of the 4 doors, and super heavy cameras and like tape ducts that they had at their sides, and all of that stuff in getting ready for it. And of course, who's the famous guy?
Harry Truman?
Harry Truman, yes. And he was the owner of
the Lodge by Spirit Lake.
Yes, the Spirit Lake Lodge, that's right. And just getting to know him. I mean, gosh, I grew up learning about him. He was in like some Oregon textbooks and so famous. I remember when I was a kid going to OMSI, and they had an earthquake exhibit there. Maybe when I was 5 or 6, and you could walk up on this bridge, and they haven't, I mean, now OMSI's kind of been closed for a while, and it shook, and you could set it to different kind of magnitudes of earthquakes and volcanoes and stuff like that, and really feel what it felt like.
So I have to correct myself. Man, I hate when I'm wrong on Sunrise Extra.
What?
Stinks being dumb on Sunrise Extra. I've done it before. I'm doing
That's
it
the
again
place
today.
where we can be dumb.
Yeah.
Howard Wright correctly points out that I was wrong when I stated that Mount St. Helens stood taller than Mount Hood before the top blew off. And I had to make sure that I'm not wrong twice by going with what he said. So I looked it up, and sure enough, Howard Wright, you are the man.
Yeah, I think Adams has always been taller, and of course Adams is taller than Mount Hood.
So Mount Hood, and now I'm going to try to say something again off the top of my head that could be wrong. But I want to say, and Rob, Brendan, Nina, I believe you can confirm this. Mount Hood, talking about Mount Hood, stands at about 11,000 feet. Right? It's about
11,292, something like that.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
There you go.
Before it erupted, Mount St. Helens stood just 9,677 feet. So obviously, even before the eruption, it stood smaller, shorter, lower than Mount Hood. I apologize for the
No worries. You're a good Googler,
information that
though.
was
When I heard
incorrect.
that, I was
You're a
like,
good
he must
Googler.
know. Renee Robertson said, I was 10 years old. My parents took my siblings and me out to sleep on our boat at the fork of the Lewis River when we woke to see Mount St. Helens erupting. We weren't sure what was happening, so my dad hightailed us out of there and back home to Felida. Our parents made us wear masks if we went outside. Totally forgot about that until now. We kids like to go out and measure the ash like snow.
Yeah.
And
they described it as like being like as fine as like bakery flour.
It was.
You know, just coating everything in inches.
Crazy.
You couldn't you would wash it off, you know, and then it would kind of harden and just stay there, and it was just a mess. You couldn't get it off.
Jennifer Taft and a few people, and we should give a shout out in his memory, the geologist David Johnston, who lost his life and made that call. He was on the ridge now that has his name, the Johnston Ridge Observatory. I think it's about 6 miles as a crow flies from the actual.
Do you have to hike to get to that? Or can you drive?
Johnston Ridge, no, they have a parking lot.
You can drive right to the observatory. I want to go, and I'd like to bring my daughter, but I don't want to hike with her. But that's cool. I really want to see that.
How many times? Go ahead, Rod.
No, I was just going to say, when you were there, and I think I'm right when I say it's 6 miles or so from the crater of St. Helens. But just imagine that if you were there, and at the time the geologist thought Mr. Johnson thought he was in a safe zone, and now we know that the heat and the wind, I mean, basically vaporized his body for the most part, and it really gives you a sense of the power of that eruption.
It was a moonscape. I mean, when you say it obliterated everything, that's exactly what happened. It's amazing to see, you know, also how the earth regenerates, and to look at it now and to see, you know, back in the day when the wildlife started coming and little tiny plants, you know, were coming up through just the destruction and the ash and, you know, that barren landscape.
How many times in the history of Sunrise Extra, now about 2 years old, how many times do you think I've recommended a book?
0.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I can recommend really only one book, and it's one about Mount St. Helens. So I'm going to have Brian Folsom Google feverishly back there behind the scenes to see if he can come up with the cover of this book. It's simply called Eruption. And I read this when we went to Hawaii like 5 years ago on vacation. Like, I actually had the time on this vacation to sit on a beach while our boys dug in the sand for like 5 hours, and I was just reading every day, and I couldn't put it down. It was fantastic. And I think the subtitle is The Untold Story of Mount St. Helens Eruption, but it basically recounts all the people who died because of the explosion that day. And there were only, thankfully, a few dozen. I say only a few dozen because if it happened Monday through Friday, there would have been hundreds of lives lost, at least, because loggers would have been up there working at the time. But because it was on a Sunday and those Weyerhaeuser workers were not working, there's the cover. There it is, Eruption. I'm telling you, this is a great read, and it tells you exactly why the people that were on the mountain that day were there, and most of them were there for recreational purposes only. They were told not to be there, right? You were warned. It was not a good area to be around right then and there. But those people, they explained why each one of them was there, how they tried to get away, how some people actually did, who were close enough to have died if they stuck around, but how they managed to get away. It's really incredible to hear some of those stories of survival, but mostly of how people did not make down the mountain.
Yeah, and it's so different because Mount St. Helens is that big, explosive, you know, ash plume. And before St. Helens, I always thought of like volcanoes as that oozy lava Kilauea type thing. Jennifer Taft says, has anybody been to Kilauea? We were there in 2016, I think, and you know, it continues to erupt and to make kind of new land masses and to cover things on the Big Island. That stuff is amazing because we went to one of the newer lava flows. I mean, it was cool, but that black mass is sharp like shards of glass. Yeah. And it's nuts. I mean, you're kind of like unsteady walking across it. And Jeff reached down and I don't know, I guess he touched it. He came back up and kind of, you know, went about his business and his hand was bleeding. Yeah. It was that sharp that you don't even feel it. It was just nuts.
Yeah.
Right. Carol chimes in just now on Facebook. Carol, thanks for joining us. Good morning to you. She says, the eruption marked my senior year of high school. She says she remembers driving through that area a little bit later, seeing intact homes that were half buried in mud flows. And she said some of those homes stood like that for years, reminding people of the destruction from that day. Howard's correct. Howard chimes in again with all the facts this morning. 57 people died in the eruption of Mount St. Helens back 41 years ago today.
And
57.
Carol, I'm sorry, Drew.
That's okay.
Carol must be the same age I am because it was her senior year. May was the May of '80 was the month that I graduated from high school as well. The eruption marked my senior year of high school. I remember driving through Toutle, Washington and seeing intact houses half buried in the mud flows. Some of those houses stood for years to remind us of the destruction.
That's the one I just read.
Did you just read that?
Yes.
Really? Well,
Yes, it was good.
I thought you were going off still talking about one of your vacation stories.
It's worth
He tuned you out.
Wow. Wow.
It's just crazy, like what a volcanic region we live in. You know, like you go over to Bend and they have the lava tube caves you can go in. You know, I mean, there's lava rock and cinders everywhere. They have, I mean, I did so many stories on the South Sisters Bulge. It is you know, an area on one side of South Sister Mountain that is growing the width of a nickel every 20 days. And it's just this magma chamber deep underground. They don't believe, you know, it's like the next one to go or anything. They believe, I was just looking it up, the latest on it. They did a story last year, and they think it'll just eventually stop growing. But it is, you know, we have so many mountain ranges that you don't know about. What's this video of,
This
Brian?
is Iceland. He
Oh,
just said,
this
yeah.
is the unpronounceable one.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try,
Yep.
but that is something else.
Can we get any images of things we can
And that's what
pronounce?
you think of when you're like, oh, something's
Yeah, totally.
erupting.
Exactly.
Not like, I mean, they say that Mount St. Helens, when I was doing the story, they say it was like a wall of water.
Yeah.
You know, all of the rivers and stuff, and everything that it blew went like 600 feet in the air or something. Like the biggest, I mean, it was the biggest
Plume
Debris
of ash
flow.
and
yes, it ever recorded. And it's just crazy, you know, trees and like everything's path, and then it all falls down. And there were people, yeah, like camping out there. Where then now you're in molten lava, and people who lost limbs and were walking in that to try and get to safety and just burning their feet and, you know, shoes coming off and all of that stuff. And there's some crazy stories.
Deandra Covington says she was just returning home from Spirit Lake about a week or so before the explosion. You guys, do you remember back in the day when you got your Reader's Reader's Digest, your TV guide, and Spirit Lake would always advertise in the TV guide, and after it blew, we were still, you know, having these advertisements placed in there every week. Come camp at Spirit
not
Lake,
there
and it was
anymore,
like,
yeah.
it's all gone.
Yeah.
It's
It's
all
interesting because, you know, the mountain was under some sort of alert going back to at least mid-April, so a good month.
Yep.
But yet, the restrictions weren't such that, or people ignored them. I don't know exactly.
They had roadblocks up,
there were
but
quite a
yeah,
few
people
people
were
still
finding
in
other
that
ways
area.
in and around, and they wanted to, you know, rubberneck and see, or, you know, have a story to tell.
Yeah, I
Very
think-
few people, if any, thought it was going to explode the way it did. And I think part of the deal was it didn't just go up, it went out.
Out.
Yeah.
Right? It kind of blew out the side and then went up, that plume of smoke. But Rod, there is a comment here from Brenda Jackson. I was going to have you read that a minute from now after
I
I
got it.
read it. Do you want to just read it now and get it out of the way?
You want me to do it first and you can read it second this time?
Do you want to go? Do you see Brenda Jackson's
Yes, I
comment?
do.
Go for it.
I was canoeing on the Clackamas River with friends, felt the explosion, then huge ring around the sun. I was pregnant at the time with my first child. And before Drew reads that comment again, let me touch on Rob, who says, Rod, we live in the ring of fire, which we do, of course, around the Pacific.
Right.
What are the chances of Mount Hood popping off? There are so many earthquakes up there, just wondering. You know, I mean, we have a number of active, still alive, I shouldn't say active, but still alive volcanoes is probably a better way to put it.
Dormant.
Or dormant.
Right?
But, you know, and dormant's almost a frightening word because, you know, I think a lot of geologists believe at some point Mount Hood will again erupt. And if you've ever climbed to Mount Hood, I mean, there's a lot of those vents where you can smell the gases and see the heat still coming out of the mountain. But I said earlier in the show, the consensus seems to be 100% that St. Helens again will be the next one to erupt again, before Three Sisters, before Hood, before Baker or Adams. Yeah.
I know we have to go. I do have a question that I don't know if you guys know
this
the
is the
answer
boys-
to.
Boy
This is
Scout
from 1980, Spirit Lake, 1980. 3 days before the actual explosion. This is footage from Spirit Lake. Yep. I guess this would be
This is
May
the Boys
15th,
Scout
1980.
camp that was up there when they were evacuating.
Am I right that Mount Tabor is actually a dormant volcano? Has anyone else?
No, that's correct. And it is actually, I think we're unique in that Tabor is the only dormant volcano basically located in a city center, at least in the United States. I think that's a true statement.
All right, there you go.
Guys, we got to go and get to our Today Show stuff, but thank you for chiming in and sharing your memories with us. Really crazy day, 41 years ago. We'll see you tomorrow.